It's often said the best way to reduce homelessness is through prevention. That's the goal of an organization called HomeStart. To tell us about the organization's annual fundraiser this Thursday is its president and executive director, Matt Pritchard. Thank you very much for being with us, Matt.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure.
I know one thing that's very important and relevant to the goal of HomeStart is actually your previous experience before you came on board. You had actually stayed in the shelter. Talk about that.
I did. So I was in my early 20s and was charged to lead the social enterprises of a homeless shelter, and I knew that if I were going to lead well and serve well, that I needed to better understand the challenges associated with homelessness. And so I accepted the job on the condition that they allow me to live in the bunks of the shelter for a year.
Well, when it comes to preventing homelessness, I think there are all kinds of situations. Maybe one of the easier is if you get somebody who's faced with displacement in the hot housing market, and sometimes, helping them squeeze one more month's worth of rent, that can make a big difference, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. We received 4,000 phone calls last year from families who are right at the brink of experiencing homelessness by way of eviction. And we had the resources to prevent 459 of those households from experiencing homelessness. But it's this below the radar extraordinary crisis that doesn't get that much attention in sort of most media outlets.
Now, a lot of the time you see people who are going from at least the stability of a job and having children going to school to something that could happen after they get evicted, because even if they eventually get back on their feet, an eviction, it's a real cloud hanging over you for a long time, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, it's it's been likened to the incarceration crisis over the last 40 years with women, particularly single mothers, because when you have an eviction on your record, it's very, very difficult to gain footing, additional housing again. And the average family who was evicted for non-payment last year was evicted for $1,500. The cost associated with that family becoming homeless is astronomical.
Of course, another thing that has to be done sometimes is that even when you have a situation where you can have housing first for somebody who's been homeless for a while, you still have a need for some kinds of supports to make sure it really kicks in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We piloted a program about 10 years ago that we've collected the data on, and it's effectively we would go into housing court with a family, we would pay roughly half of the rental arrearage, work with that family for 12 months while they repay the balance of that arrearage or while we access other resources. And after 4 years, only 5% of the families we work with have experienced eviction by non-payment, because over that 12 months of working with the family, we identify all the drivers of the eviction, the arrearage, and give them the tools and work with them to mitigate against the risk of eviction again.
Now, when I look at the plus and minus here, I see something like $750 an expense, and how much money are you saving potentially that the taxpayers might have to pick up?
Oh my goodness! Well, so if a family eventually ends up living in the shelter system, that will cost $30,000 a year, and the Boston Housing Authority, their finance team, has given us their numbers that it cost the BHA $10,000 to evict a family, which we've demonstrated we could prevent for less than $2,000. And so we've created a system that we're introducing to private institutional property owners that allows them to reimburse HomeStart for a very small fraction of what it would cost to evict a family, and thereby creating an economically sustainable solution to the eviction crisis across Massachusetts, which we're preparing to scale right now.
I want to come back to your experience in the shelter, because what made you so determined to focus on something different?
I identify with people on the margins. I moved around quite a bit as a youngster, went to 9 schools in 11 years, was consistently the outsider, and the plight of folks who are marginalized in society sort of as a group of people who resonates. And the thing that surprised me living in the shelter is that I found over and over that I wanted to be more like my bunkmates, who where getting knocked down and getting back up was the story of their lives. And I wanted more of that. And if given the opportunity to advocate for and create solutions around homelessness for them, I wanted to do it. And so I've done it.
And I haven't had your direct experience, but one thing I imagine must be going through the minds of people in shelters and people who avoid going into shelters is that they want to be able to manage their life and be independent.
Oh my goodness! One of my bunkmates was a young man named Jason. He was 25, and he had come to his house one day, and there was an eviction note on his door. He had a 5-year-old little boy. He opened the door, and all of his wife's possessions were gone. Evidently, she had developed a substance abuse issue, had not told him that she wasn't paying rent. And so the next thing you know, he is living in the car with his 5-year-old son. And after 2 months of living in the car with him creating a narrative to protect his son from the harsh reality of their situation, he drove to school. His son's teacher realized what was going on. The police, the DCF worker, principal, teacher were all there and removed custody. And so Jason moved into the shelter to scrape as much money as possible together for first lessons security. And while this incredible amount of trauma happened, so from a taxpayer's perspective, it made no sense at all. From a childhood trauma perspective, it made no sense at all. And all of that could have been prevented for $700.
This has been in the news, and we're talking with Matt Pritchard from HomeStart. Matt, every year you have this fundraiser. It seems a little bit of a chill, but it's not like plunging in the waters, in South Boston here. It's called iCycle. So explain, how's this going to work?
Yeah, so it's an outdoor stationary bike marathon at International Place in the financial district of Boston. And we have 40 bikes under a tent with a DJ from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And we have hour-long spinning sessions. And the idea is that we raise resources for our clients, but also show solidarity with men and women who are living outside by braving the elements for an hour.
So, in other words, you're saying that people just do this for 1 hour and then it's over?
That's it. Yes, and so a couple of years ago, folks' water bottles froze because it was so cold, right? This year, we don't anticipate it being that cold, but the spirit of it is fabulous, and it's a great event. People can learn about it by going to homestart.org/iCycle, could support by coming down and cheering riders on. Folks still have space to ride if they'd like to, or donate to the cause.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Matt Pritchard from HomeStart.